we have assisted over 10 clients with a US agent service. This is done by Reguliance directly. This is a legal requirement for companies outside of Europe, outside of the United States, excuse me. And we have worked in over 30 individual projects. I'm not going to go into detail here, but these involve successful pre-IND, pre-ANDA meetings, projects for assistance with NDAs, BLAs, ANDAs, and also orphan drug designations, and IND, BLA, DMF, eCTD publishing projects. And then we have gateway submissions and also the structured product labeling submissions. Our team worked in the writing of ODDs, orphan drug designations, INDs, and also the pediatric study plans, the initial pediatric study plans. And we helped compile DMFs, ANDAs, and much more. So we were very active. Now, you might ask yourself, why is Asphalion, a European company headquartered in Barcelona, branch office in Munich, why are we focused on FDA? And well, you see, we have on the one hand, we have an excellent collaboration with Reguliance, but we also have a lot of personal interest and passion in our team. And I myself, I really enjoy working in FDA projects. I find them very interesting. And also, last but not least, we have a continuous and increasing demand from our clients, from our customers, to support them with these projects. And lastly, also, it really never gets boring to work with FDA projects. And if you've seen the news of Allergen that just came out recently, how they protected their drug patent for their eye drug Restasis, just by transferring the patent to a Native American tribe. You understand what I'm referring to. This patent dance here and now this elegant or controversial way how to deal with the drug fight between companies is just one example of how dynamic the world is in US in the pharma market. Okay, last slide here, just the logistics. I mentioned this before. Please feel free to submit at any time questions through the chat function of the GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end, but you can also contact us at any time. Contact Bruce Thompson directly. Here's his email, or Lydia and myself, either with our info at, or we have a specific email address for FDA projects, fda@asphalion.com, and we'll get back to you. So now I will pass the control over to Bruce, Mr. Bruce Thompson, for the beginning of the second session, Introduction to FDA and the What's Hot topics.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for the opportunity again to speak on behalf of Asphalion concerning U.S. regulatory requirements. I'm really happy to present today, and I just want to comment on your last slide about the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. That I live very close to that reservation called the Akwesasne Reservation. I know every street, every house in that place, and it's fascinating to me that this incredibly tiny, small group sitting on the edge of the Canadian border can have such a huge impact, even in the drug industry. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a very brief overview of the FDA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what's hot in terms of FDA right now and what's going on in the industry, focused just in the U.S. And I'll have some items to talk about that. So I'll get started. So FDA in general, and this is very obviously it's It's a very introductory level. It's an agency within the Department of Health and Human Services. If anybody has been listening to the political stuff that's going on in the U.S., Health and Human Services and FDA, there's a lot of movement right now because we had the change in administration under the Republican control. So FDA is under the Department of Health and Human Services. There are approximately 16,000 employees as of 2017, so it is like a small city, a small town. I'm giving you reference 10,000 employees in 2004, so 6,000 employees over the last 11 years. Approximately 5.1 billion budget in 2017. In 2004, 1.6 billion. So what you can see is that the budget has increased many times, many-fold, but not necessarily the employees. So they're actually using the money to increase their wages, which is a good thing to attract expertise, but also they've invested in infrastructure, and that's starting to pay off now. So the areas of regulation. Obviously, pharmaceuticals and biologics, medical devices and radiological products, but they also do other things: animal feeds, foods, cosmetics, and tobacco products is the recent one that was added to their list. There was a new FDA commissioner who was appointed. His name is Scott Gottlieb. And he is a veteran at FDA, so he has many years in FDA. He's very well liked and very well respected. It's kind of nice to have somebody that on both the generic and also on the new drug side is a very respected individual for his positions and also his approach and scientific philosophies. Importantly for us, his political emphasis is to reduce regulation and reduce drug pricing. Now, reduce drug pricing, you may think that's not good, but certainly the industry has a way of working its way around that. He's viewed as a positive step for the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, and he's a promoter of real-world evidence, and I'm going to get into this in just a moment, to support approvals. So under the FDA commissioner, there's a number of offices. One of the important offices is the Office of Medical Products and Tobacco, and two of those centers under the office that you will be dealing with at some point in your careers are the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER, and the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. And usually everything that you do will funnel under those two centers. Obviously, under those centers, there are a number of offices, a number of divisions, a number of branches, and there are thousands of employees. So huge group of people working in those areas. There's also the Office of Special Medical Programs, and I highlight that because that if you're working on orphan drug products, if you're working on combination, or if you're looking at pediatrics, that is the group that you'll be dealing with. That's the group where the initiatives under those areas will be coming from. More recent group that was set up is Office of the Oncology Center of Excellence, and this was simply to put a focus on oncology and to put together cross-functional teams, just to find the best expertise for oncology and be able to tap it no matter what type of product you had. If it's associated with oncology, it's going to get quite a bit of focus. And then there's the Center for Devices and the Center for Tobacco Products, which I'm not going to talk about today. So CDER, which is the drug group, Center for Drugs, they have 13 offices, and 2, which I've highlighted here, you'll be dealing with Office of New Drugs, Office of Generic Drugs. Again, under those offices, there are many divisions, there are many branches, they're huge. There's also Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, Surveillance and Epidemiology, and Compliance. You'll bump into some of those when you have an inspection at your facility, if that happens. And you might also, in terms of pharmaceutical quality, there's a lot of initiatives coming out of there about how to test and characterize products. So CBER, the biologics group, has 8 offices, and they include the following. The Office of Tissue and Advanced Therapies, I've highlighted that because that's probably one of the 2 areas that, one of the 2 groups that you'd be working with. It was previously called Office of Cellular Tissue and Gene Therapy, but they recently changed that. I sort of harmonized a bit when they talk about advanced therapies. The Office of Vaccine Research and Review, these are vaccines, typically they're for infections and parasites and such. When you talk about tumor vaccines, that type of vaccine, you're talking about OTAT, the Office of Tissue and Advanced Therapies, okay? Because that's typically a cell-based or gene-based vaccine, and that's that would be under advanced therapies. Okay, I just put this page up. These are some of the reference guides. You know, people refer to the Bible of different things. These are some of the documents from the Bible of FDA, and they are worth having in your collection. The 21st Century Review Process Desk Reference. And if you go on FDA site and you Google these, you'll be able to come up with them. Best practices for communication between IND sponsors and FDA. That's really important. And these are quite detailed, and they're written in layman's terms. So it's pretty easy to understand what they're talking about. And then the last one is good review management principles and practices for effective IND development and review. And again, this has to do with your IND submissions, which most companies in new drug and biologics will be looking at and working with. Okay, what's really hot? Real world evidence. Now, it seems that Europeans have been dealing with this for quite a while, but in the US, where we're very legalistic, we need very concrete evidence that can be audited. We need proof regarding the benefits and risks of a drug. And recently, there's been an initiative to look more at real world evidence, to look at something other than randomized placebo-controlled trials to support the efficacy and safety of drugs. And real-world evidence is based on real-world data. And so this is data that can be collected. It's being collected now. There's huge databases, patient registries, for instance, or other studies. It's also being collected by insurance companies when there are health claims. So there's a variety of sources, and FDA is looking to capitalize on those. I don't think I don't think you're ever going to be able to use this data to get an approval, but I think certainly for new drugs, when you look at the current standard of 2 well-controlled studies, I think I could see the day when it would be 1 well-controlled study and some very good real-world evidence. So you may be saying 1 really good study, and there's a patient registry out there that we can use. And the FDA is just starting to work with this and starting to figure out what they're going to accept. The devices group is out ahead. They released a guidance this August talking about real-world evidence, and it is certainly worth looking at that guidance just to see what FDA has in mind in terms of what they might accept or what they might be looking at. They also held a workshop this September, this month, to start a process to look at real-world evidence and what they would accept, what they would need to see. Do they need to audit the raw data from these? These are questions that that need to be worked out. But there's a big movement in that way, so I think this is really important. Another one that's really hot is that the PDUFA GDUFA reauthorization just came out in August, and this is a reauthorization of user fee programs. PDUFA is the prescription drug user fee, and it's number 6, so it's the 6th time it's been authorized for them to charge fees, and the GDUFA is generic drug, and it's the 2nd program under that that's been authorized. And these authorizations run from fiscal year 2018, which starts October 2017, and it runs to 2022. Now, you can find these fee changes, and we'll talk a little bit about them, but what's really important is, in addition to the fee changes, this Reauthorization Act changed regulations, and there are significant changes, and I think that needs to be brought up. You really need to look at it. What I found is that there's a great summary by a law firm called Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara, and that document, that summary that they have, goes into all of the legislative changes from this reauthorization, and it's extremely helpful. There's a couple of things that I'll refer to in my presentation where you'll see that the changes are already happening. So I would ask you to take note of that, not just the change in fees, but also the change in regulation. Oops, let me go back. Okay, so for the prescription drug, this is new drugs and biologics. They sort of streamlined it a bit, and there used to be a number of fees. Now there's a couple of fees. One is, of course, the application fee when you submit your application for market authorization, and the other one is a program fee, and this is something that they're being consistent with across their fee structures. This is an annual program fee that will be charged, and it looks like, if you're familiar with the other system, it looks like the product fee that they used to charge. There are no supplement fees or annual establishment fees anymore for new prescription drug applications. Okay, so the fees for the application with clinical data, which is what most people file, is $2.4 million. No clinical data, $1.2 million, that's 1/2. And then the annual program fee is about $300,000 per each prescription drug product. And I highlight that because that means that's a specific strength of your drug. So if you had 2 5, 10 milligram tablets, you pay 3 times that fee. All right. So that program fee is a lot of money, and it can add up. I mean, when you have tons of products, it's a very large fee. Again, that's new drugs, and that begins in October. Under the generic reauthorization, all the holders or owners of ANDAs will pay an annual program fee. And the program fee, it's interesting, they've looked at trying to assist small business. And so the program fee is based on the number of ANDAs held by the company. If you have 1 to 5 ANDAs, it's 10% of the maximum fee. If you have 6 to 19 ANDAs, it's in between. And if you have 20 plus ANDAs, it's a full program fee every year. So they've broken this down so that when you're just starting out, you get a real break in terms of program fee. When you've got a big company running and going, you pay a full program fee. They've also introduced a CMO fee, which is like a reduced manufacturer's fee. So if you're using a contract manufacturer to do your generic drug manufacturing, it's a reduced rate, aside from what you would pay if you were doing that manufacturing in-house. The other thing that is a relief to me is that facility fees are only paid if the ANDA is approved. So you don't have to pay a facility fee if your ANDA is under review. ANDAs could have been under review for many years in the past, and facilities were paying fees for these ANDAs that weren't even approved. So I'm happy to see now that you only pay the fee if the ANDA has been approved. Okay, the GDUFA fees for the generics, there are significant changes from the past program, from the GDUFA 1. I'm not going to list out those fees because it's a complicated fee structure, but I gave you the website here, contact for those drug user fees. So you'll see that that list of fees pop up. It's very different than what they had a year ago. So I would ask that you take a look at that. Okay, what's hot? Priority Review Voucher Program. All right, so there are two programs. One is rare pediatric diseases, the other one is tropical diseases. These were programs to try and get companies involved in research in these two areas. And they're incentive programs where you can obtain a voucher upon approval of your application. And that voucher you can use to have a priority review, a shortened review of your next application, or you can take that voucher and you can sell it. And those vouchers are selling for millions and millions and millions of dollars. So $60 million for a voucher it's a blink of an eye. So these are very important programs, not only to help you internally if you need to do, if you want to get a priority review, but also to give you the money if you decide to sell it to another company, this voucher, to help you with your drug development in your next development. Okay, what's still warm? I bring up establishment registration, and I bring it up quite frequently, just to remind everybody who has to register their establishment. Obviously, foreign establishments that are manufacturers have to register, but establishments, in terms of the definition, is finished dosage form API manufacturers, related analytical testing facilities. So if you do release testing externally at a laboratory, that laboratory has to register, has to do establishment registration. Your bioequivalence, bioavailability facilities have to have establishment registration. Supposing that you do in vitro testing to support bioequivalence, if you do that externally at a laboratory, maybe you're working with meter dose inhalers or some other combination product, those facilities also have to have establishment registration. So it's important that you understand what that means and what that entails. And I always try and bring that up. What's getting hot? FDA foreign inspections. There is a sort of mutual recognition program that's started up. It's been going for a while, and now it's starting to get pretty serious. FDA says that they will reduce their EU inspections, and they will rely on the EU inspections to approve sites and products. In August of this year, they just released a statement that they've agreed to full sharing of the contents of inspection reports. And this is important because in the inspection reports that they got and that anybody can get, we can get, they're redacted, which means that if they refer to a specific product, that is taken out, it's blanked out so you can't see it. So nobody knows what batch, nobody knows what product, all the sensitive information is taken out. And now both FDA and EMA will be able to look at the others' inspection reports and get the full report. So they will be able to go after companies and specific products, whereas before they just sort of had a generalization that there were issues. So that's getting kind of exciting. Why is this important? Well, because there was a study came out that said that 46% of foreign offices, the positions weren't filled. They had empty offices, and 33% of foreign establishments had no inspections. So FDA found that they couldn't handle the growing number of foreign facilities, and they had to do something with that. And so here you can see, it used to be that there were a lot of domestic inspections and very few foreign inspections. And then the number of foreign inspections, which are the dark bars, started ramping up. Obviously, this shows inspections, so there's 33% more that didn't get inspected above this. So FDA knew they had a real problem, and they are trying to resolve it. And hopefully, that will make it easier on all of us, because FDA is not going to have to come over to Europe and do an inspection. They're going to rely on a European inspection. Okay, and that ends my FDA and what's hot section. I think now, let me just escape this. I'm doing the next program. Yes, I am, and I'm just going to continue on here. So the next topic, under obligations and regulatory options during drug development, there are a couple of titles: meetings with FDA, IND applications, U.S. agent requirements, and DMF. And I'll be speaking about the first three, and then Lydia will be, I believe Lydia will be speaking about drug master files. So I'm going to get started on oops, let me just put this in the right mode so you can see my screen. There we go. I'm just going to talk about FDA meetings for new drugs and biologics. I'm not going to talk about meetings for biosimilars, which are slightly different. I'm not going to talk about meetings for generic drugs, which are quite different. And I'm not going to talk about meetings for devices, which I don't have any experience with. But so what I'm going to talk about are the FDA meetings for new drugs and biologics, and this is sort of what I'll cover. And we'll go through an example and such and see. So who permits formal meetings? There are a number of groups before we mentioned CDER. And under CDER is the Office of Generic Drugs, and yes, they do allow meetings. They're pretty limited, but they're starting to expand. CBER, as we talked about before, has meetings, and the Center for Devices allows formal meetings. And when I say formal meetings, I mean, you know, you request a meeting, there's all sorts of provisions about timing and such. So when you request a meeting, there are three types of meetings: A, B, and C. It's nice. Type A meetings, A being the most critical. Dispute resolution meetings. You have a dispute. Your drug development is being held up. You can get a Type A meeting. Your IND has been put on clinical hold. You can't move forward. You can't enroll patients. You can get a very quick meeting. Special protocol assessment. This is a special program having to deal with agreement on protocols with FDA. There's a program called SPA, Special Protocol Assessment. That would be a Type A meeting. And post-action meetings where FDA does a review of your market authorization and says, no, we're not going to approve you. You'll have to try again. Post-action meetings are the follow-up meetings with FDA, and they'll schedule them quite quickly. Type B meetings are the meetings that you will bump into most often. These are pre-IND meetings before you file your IND. End of phase 1 meetings, that's more not as common. It might be more based on oncology, for instance. Or end of phase 2 meetings, which are very common, especially for European companies. And pre-NDA, pre-BLA meetings, which everyone who's going to get an approval is going to have a meeting. Again, post-action meetings, certain types. Meetings regarding the REMS program, post-marketing requirements, breakthrough therapy products, and authorization for pre-emergency use of drugs. And then Type C meetings are sort of the catch base in every other type of meeting other than A and B. Okay, and I just want to bring up a recent thing that's happened is FDA has introduced a meeting called written response only meetings. This actually isn't a meeting. You go through the whole process of requesting a meeting and providing information, and FDA says, we're not going to meet with you. We're going to provide you with written responses only. And they call it a meeting, but as we know, it's really not a meeting. It's just written responses. It's correspondence. And I think what they've done is they've had so many meetings, they're just trying to reduce the number of meetings and resources that they put. They are, by regulation, compelled to meet certain goals for meetings, and so by making written responses into meetings, they can meet these goals much easier. Timelines. Okay, so meeting schedule date. So you send in a meeting request, a request for a meeting, for a type A meeting, and within 30 days, they will schedule your meeting from when they receive the request. For a type B meeting, it's within 60 days. For a type C meeting, it's within 75 days of your meeting request. Now, I've added some information in red font here under type B. This is one of the changes from the reauthorization that went on of the user fees. For type B meetings, which are end of phase meetings, end of phase 1, end of phase 2, they'll schedule it within 70 days of the meeting request, not 60 days, okay? From experience, the Center for Drugs, CDER, they commonly don't meet these timeframes for when they'll schedule their meetings. Typically, it could be a month after, you know, if there's a 60-day limit, it could be another month on top. Center for Biologics tends to meet these dates. They're very date-oriented. So when they say 60 days, it's going to be 60 days. So just to give you that little background. Okay, so what I was going to do is just go through a typical type B meeting. One that you'll bump into is pre-investigational new drug meetings, pre-IND or PIND meetings. And you do this prior to the submission of your IND. And the purpose is to agree on the non-clinical data. You can discuss scope and design of all 3 phases of your clinical program, or not. You can discuss one phase, depending on what you're working on. You discuss pediatric study plans, if that's something you need to do, or you can determine whether you need to do it. And you can talk about expedited reviews, approvals, fast track, applicability, breakthrough therapy, all of the programs that are available to expedite approval. You can talk about chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, and you can talk about presentation of the data in your IND submission. Maybe you have some strange thing going on in your manufacturing. I don't know anybody who doesn't. And you want to talk about how you're going to present the data to, you know, maybe you're transitioning from one manufacturing site to another, or process to another process, and how are you going to present the data. Anyway, so these are the types of things that you would have in your pre-IND meeting. The first thing you do is you're going to submit a meeting request. And the purpose of the meeting request is sort of threefold. FDA wants to know whether they're going to grant the meeting or not. They want to know they can decide on the meeting format. Do they want to meet you face-to-face, or are they going to do written responses only, or are they going to have a teleconference with you? And they're also going to determine from the meeting request who, from their side, from FDA's side, is going to attend. And once they know that, then they can schedule a meeting date, right? So what they want to do is they want to look at information in advance in this meeting request, and then they can come back to you with a date. The contents, and all of this is available in guidances. The content here, I've started to put it out. It's very straightforward. Sure. So point number 8, a list of draft questions grouped by discipline. All right. So maybe you want to start out with chemistry and then non-clinical and then clinical, or reverse. Maybe you want to have regulatory questions. This is another area. Your list of attendees, you get to suggest who at FDA might attend, although FDA is going to send who they want to send. You put in suggested dates and times, and you put in the format and information about the meeting package. My suggestion to you is keep it brief. You have to understand why FDA needs this meeting request, and it's only to satisfy, right? They want to know who they have to have at the meeting, and then they can schedule it, or whether they're actually going to have a meeting. So keep it as brief as possible. You also have the opportunity, if your questions, if you find you have an incredible number of questions, you can sometimes break out the chemistry manufacturing section into a separate meeting. Okay, timelines. So we talked about it before that once they receive a meeting request, they'll schedule the meeting according to ABC. Okay, once you submit your meeting request, FDA will respond to you for a type A meeting within 14 days. So within 14 days, you'll know whether they're going to grant you a meeting, what the format is, what the date is, etc. For type B meeting, it's 21 days. For a type C meeting, it's 21 days. Again, with a recent reauthorization, the end of phase type B meetings, they're going to send you an acknowledgement within 14 days, not 21 days. Okay, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to send in a meeting package, technical information package to support your meeting. The contents of the meeting package is the same as the meeting request, but it's a little different. For item 5, which is the list of sponsor or applicant attendees, this is when you want to update that list. You don't, at this point, you don't have to be absolutely certain, but you can update the list at this time. And then item 9 was the list of questions, and here you put in your final questions. So in your meeting request, you might have had an idea of what it looked like. Now you need to put in your final questions, the final wording exactly, okay? And then in item 10, data to support the discussion. These are the supporting data where you will go into detail on whatever it is you want to talk about in this meeting. And typically people have 3 sections, the clinical, the non-clinical, the CMC, and they sit there and the questions will refer to these data packages, all right? Okay, so timelines. When do you need to submit this meeting package? For a type A meeting, you have to include all the information when you request the meeting. All right, there's no data package, and that's because you're going to have the meeting within 30 days. So everything has to go in with the meeting request. For type B meeting, it's 30 days before the meeting, or if it's an end of phase meeting, now it's 50 days before. And this is quite a big change for companies. And then for a type C meeting, it's at least 47 days. Yeah, 47. It couldn't be 50. It had to be 47. 47 days before the meeting date. And FDA is very particular about those dates. So you need to meet them. The next thing you get back is preliminary responses from FDA. And this is for face-to-face meetings or teleconference meetings. FDA holds an internal meeting, and then they will send you by email, usually, their preliminary responses to your comments. I put in here 1 to 7 days, but it's usually 1 to 2 days before the meeting. Now, European companies, usually you're on a plane over the Atlantic when these responses are sent. Hopefully you can negotiate and try and get them before that, so you have everybody available to address them. Let me just go back. Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to. Okay, how are meetings conducted? Okay, so the regulatory project manager, the FDA project manager, who you've been dealing with, your U.S. agent has been dealing with, or you have been dealing with, to set up the meeting, they will, introduce the characters, the FDA characters, and they'll sort of conduct the meeting. I've highlighted here that presentations, I know in Europe you use presentations quite a bit. They are not looked upon well by FDA. FDA expects everything that they need to know should be in the brief, in the meeting package that they received before the meeting. and they don't want to be surprised by new data. However, if in their preliminary responses they don't agree with you and you think that you need to provide new information to support your points, then you might want to put together a presentation. And typically, I would try and send that to FDA before the meeting. So it's probably the night before that I'd be emailing FDA saying, look, we need to do a small presentation. Here's what it's going to look like. So I just want to leave that out there. All right. That sort of covers the basics of the conduct of a meeting with FDA. And the other meetings, the Type A meetings and the Type C meetings, sort of run the same way as the Type B meeting that I just went through. What I want to talk about now is an outline of an IND, investigational new drug application. That's item number 2 here. So this is sort of what I'm going to talk about in terms of topics. Do you need an IND? When do you open it? You know, where are the regulations? What's the structure and content? Submissions and fees, etc. All right. What is an investigational new drug application? It's described in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is a reference document, an electronic document now. It's nice. That you'll be referencing often if you deal with the Food and Drug Administration. And the IND is described in Section 312. Everything you want to know about an IND in terms of regulation is in Section 312. And essentially what an IND does is it allows you to conduct clinical studies without having to have an approved drug. It's an investigational drug, right? Do I need an IND? Yes and no. Yes is typically for the products that we deal with in our industry, in our development. No is, you know, maybe you're an investigator and you're using products for approved indications, or you're conducting a bioequivalence or bioavailability study. That is exempt from an IND. As long as I put down here common BABE. If it's an unusual BABE study, you might have to have an IND. One example of that would be supposing that you're doing an asthma study with an inhaler, and you're doing allergens, and you're challenging. You're doing like a histamine challenge or something. If you had to use histamine, then you would probably have to file an IND. All right, so it's for uncommon BEBA studies, you might need an IND. Okay, when is it opened? When do you open an IND? When do you need to file it? When you're first starting testing in humans in the US, usually begins in phase 1, but also can be in phase 2 or 3, and that is more typical for foreign companies coming to the US. You'll probably do your initial clinical evaluation in Europe, where it's cheaper and quicker, and then you might want to bring it into the US, either because they have very specific sites over here, clinical sites to use, or you want more publicity, or you want to start looking at US development and you want some input from the Food and Drug Administration. So you may come at phase 1, 2, or 3 and open your IND. So what are FDA's objectives with regard to an IND? There's 2 main objectives. One is safety and rights of subjects. And their safety emphasis is for all clinical testing that you do. No matter what you're doing, they're looking at safety first. When you get into phase 2 and phase 3, they look at scientific quality as a second aspect. Likelihood that investigations will yield data capable of meeting standards for market approval. So not only do you get, you need to see this in informed consent, but you're also going to get we don't think that that endpoint is going to be useful for approval. That's not the right endpoint. Or we want you to include another endpoint, or your patient inclusion exclusion criteria isn't adequate because. So starting in phase 2, they're also going to give you a lot of comments on scientific quality to meet approval. The IND regulations, where can you find them? Well, I said that they're in the Code of Federal Regulations. They're in section 312. And 312 is broken down into a bunch of subparts, A through I. And subpart B, investigational new drug application, gives you the content and format of the IND. And then the remaining sections talk about other activities having to do with an IND, depending on what type of development you're doing. What is the structure and content of an IND? When you look at the 21 CFR 312 regulation, they give you sort of a traditional format. They don't refer to CTD format, which is unfortunate, but they don't. However, there is a guidance document in which they've mapped out, they've taken the traditional format and they've mapped it to the eCTD format. It's called the Comprehensive Table of Contents, Heading, and Hierarchy. And Appendix 1 of that document is where they map the sections for an IND, for an NDA, a BLA, and an ANDA. And they map it to the current CTD modules 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Module 1, as you probably know, is U.S. regional content. All right, and I'm not going to go through all of Module 1, but it is significantly different than what you would be used to filing in Europe in an application to run a clinical trial. And there are just a number of sections. I'm not going to highlight any of these in general, but there are a lot of sections. The last section, General Investigation Plan, I don't know if you're doing that in Europe, but that's certainly necessary in the US. You need to lay out what you're going to do for the next year. You may lay out what you're going to do in your development as far as you can see. It's up to you. Module 1 also contains the labeling and a bunch of requirements having to do with environmental assessment, having to do with proprietary names. There's just Module 1 is just a catch-all for the U.S. regional information. The other modules, Module 2, 3, 4, and 5, they are formatted in the same way that you would for an EU CTD document or CTD sections. So I'm not going to go into those, what is in those sections. The IND application, the content and format. And again, this we'll come back to this when we look at eCTD requirements. You can still submit a paper IND, although I don't know who does this anymore, except maybe you're an individual investigator. But you need to use the CTD format, or you can use the traditional format. And that can go on until May of 2018. Most people are filing electronically, and if you do that, you must use the eCTD format. And you can submit it either on a diskette, you can mail it in a diskette, or you can submit it through the FDA gateway, which is more common these days. All right, submission. We contact FDA in advance to get an assigned IND number. And I typically also call the division to let them know the IND is coming in. And it's also to identify that you're actually applying to the correct group. for your IND, and sometimes that's hard to determine. In terms of fees, there are no fees for an IND. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to get a lot of information regarding development and not pay for it. So it's important for your development. It's also important if you are looking at getting a potential licensing partner. If you have an active IND, if you've opened an IND and it's active in the U.S., it's an important step, and licensing partners look towards that. Okay, FDA reviews of an IND. There are a number of policies and procedures. Again, I can't go into these policies and procedures. I've listed them here. If you want to take a look at them, they talk about timelines and their procedures for review. In general, FDA has 30 days from when you submit your IND to review the IND for safety and to tell you it's reasonably safe to proceed, in which case it will be active, or it's not safe to proceed and we're putting you on clinical hold. And there's a whole there's a guidance that has to do with clinical hold procedures, how you get off of clinical hold, and the activities surrounding that. During the 30 days, typically you'll get some questions from the reviewers. They come through the project manager, and the reviewers are going to ask you questions if they see that there's something missing, or they might need clarification on something, or they can't find a document in your submission. And so you need to respond to these requests. They're called information requests, and you need to respond to them quite quickly. And sometimes FDA will put in, we need to have this by end of business day, tomorrow, or the next day. Other times they just make the request and you're left to guess when to do it. At the end of 30 days, you could get something, it's amazing. You can get an email that says, yeah, you can go ahead and say to proceed. You might get a letter, or you might not get anything at all. You'll get a call, you get no letter, you get nothing at 30 days. If you hear absolutely nothing in 30 days, you're free to go ahead and proceed. FDA doesn't have to verbally tell you or in writing tell you that your IND is active. And contrary to what you'll see, INDs are not approved. That term is not used. It's either active or inactive or on clinical hold. So if someone says they have an approved IND, yeah, they're probably talking that they have an active IND. What is a clinical hold? Well, it's an order where FDA says you cannot proceed, you cannot initiate your clinical investigation. A full clinical hold is all of the protocols that you're trying to run under your IND. A partial clinical hold may be one protocol, or even part of a protocol under your IND that they decide is unsafe to proceed. The procedure for this I put down is a manual of procedures 3060.1, so we can find that. How is it managed? I'm not going to go into the details of this because this webinar is too short, but I've left the slides in here. IND maintenance is the next thing. Obviously, an IND spans all of your clinical development in the U.S., which goes from the first time that you initiate clinical development to the approval of your product, and in most cases extends beyond the approval of your product, because you'll always be doing some sort of study. You'll be looking at expanding an indication, you'll be looking at testing something, and so people have an IND open even past their product approval. Can be many years. And so there are things that you have to do to support the IND. Protocol amendments. There are specific requirements for when you have to notify the FDA that you're going to amend a protocol. Information amendments have to do with your changing chemistry, manufacturing controls, for you're adding non-clinical information. It's a variety of things under information amendments. IND safety reports, specific, this is pharmacovigilance and how and when you need to notify FDA of suspected adverse events in your clinical studies. And other post-marketing reports, you know, there's an annual report that has to be filed. There are other types of amendments that you would want to file to your IND. So there's quite a bit of maintenance involved in an IND. Again, this has to do with, this just goes into information amendments, IND safety reports. I'm not going to go through these separately, but I've left these slides in here for you to look at. And here's the annual report outline. And I'm going to end it there with regard to IND content. The last topic I'm going to talk about is U.S. agent requirements. As Michael had said, I've been working with Asphalion for many years now, and in partnership, simply because, well, it's for two things, but one of the main things that I do is I represent some of Asphalian's clients when they go to deal with the Food and Drug Administration. So I'm going to talk about U.S. agent requirements. And these are the things I'm going to cover, all right? So why do you need them? What is a U.S. agent? Why does FDA want them? And what services can be provided? So what do you need a U.S. agent for? What if, again, this mostly focuses on foreign firms. If you file an orphan drug application, you need a U.S. agent. Any of the big filings, IND or NDA, ANDA, BLA, biosimilar, any of the approval applications or the investigational applications, you need to have a U.S. agent working for you. Foreign establishment registration and drug listing, you need to have a U.S. agent. If you're dealing with the generics group, controlled correspondence or self-ID, you need to have an agent. Citizen petition, this is something that you may not be familiar with. I keep it in the list. Registration of foreign devices, registration of food manufacturing, packaging, and holding. So it's very broad what you have to have one for, but there's also things you can do where you don't have to have a U.S. agent. Drug master file. If you want to file a drug master file, you don't have to have a U.S. agent. If you file a master file for the biologics group, you don't have to have a U.S. agent. And so I've listed it out here. But FDA will tell you that they encourage you to have a U.S. agent for some of these formal filings. Okay, it makes their life easier. It can make your life easier just to have someone who deals with FDA. What is a U.S. agent? Okay, it's the sponsor for an IND, or applicant if you're doing a market authorization, applicant, a representative, or U.S. agent. And the official thing is upon whom services of all processes, notice, orders, decisions, requirements, and other communications may be made on behalf of the sponsor or applicant. So essentially, if FDA wants to communicate with you, they need a U.S. agent, and with regard to those applications that I talked about in the last slide. A U.S. agent must be a permanent resident in the United States. You don't have to be a citizen, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen, but you at least have to have permanent residency in the United States. And in most instances, almost all correspondence concerning FDA-regulated activities is between the FDA and the U.S. agent. All right, so all the correspondence that comes back from FDA, it will be sent to the U.S. agent, and then the U.S. agent will send it on to you. All right, and so this is sort of where the U.S. agent is in the relationship. All right, very cozy between FDA and the drug companies, right in between, sort of in the activity zone, we'll say, and not too close to the patient. Okay, who is your U.S. agent? It's really broad. It can be a consultant or consulting firm, right? Law firms represent contract organizations. Your CRO may be offering this service. Could be a U.S. partner if you have one already. Customer, importer. It could be anybody, even your uncle who lives in New York. As long as they're a permanent resident, that's the only requirement. As long as they're a permanent resident, they can be your U.S. agent. Why does FDA want a U.S. agent? Okay, so they want to communicate in English during regular business hours. And I know that sounds funny because when you talk to people from FDA, 80% of the people from FDA, I'm not sure if English is their first language. So you'll find it's very difficult to understand people from FDA most of the time. But anyways, they say they want to talk in English and they want during their regular business hours. It improves their administrative and procedural aspects. So they don't have to spend as much time educating their contact about procedure, all right? The U.S. agent should know exactly what the procedures are, how to communicate, and to assist the client in communicating with FDA. That's the most important thing. It's also someone in the U.S. with legal authority and responsibility on behalf of the client. And you have to understand that that U.S. agent acts legally on your behalf. And they are also, to some extent, legally responsible for what you do. So, sort of a sharing there. And it's also an emergency contact. If this is more important, supposing that they have a problem with a contamination of drug supply or excipients, and they need to absolutely get hold of the companies immediately. They want to be able to reach somebody in the U.S. quickly. And they also want someone knowledgeable of U.S. regulations. What services should a U.S. agent provide? Okay, U.S. agents should be able to prepare any administrative transmittal documents. There's a lot of forms and schedules that go into these submissions. U.S. agent should know how to prepare those documents for you. They should be able to contact FDA by email and phone. Okay, for inquiries. They shouldn't say, well, you know, talk to somebody else. They should be able to deal and assist you with inquiries. They need to be able to receive all correspondence from FDA, and that requires secure email. FDA used to say, yeah, maybe secure email, maybe not. Now, FDA's emphasis is everybody has to have secure email. And it's a very specific secure email that you have to set up directly with FDA. It's not a secure system, it's an FDA secure email. And you have to be able to receive phone, fax, and US mail. FDA still uses the US Postal Service and they send letters out. That is their official communication method, all right? So you have to have a post office box at your house or at your office or someplace where you can receive US mail. U.S. agent can arrange and participate in teleconferences or meetings, and that most of my clients want assistance in doing that. Finding the right contacts to set up a meeting, arranging all the logistics for the meeting, and then going to the meeting and sort of chairing the meeting on behalf of the client. And also in terms of working with affiliates and in putting together submissions. And I mentioned Asphalion here because we work hand in hand to sort of provide a seamless service regarding all of the U.S. agent activities. And that's really important from a client's perspective. You don't want to be managing various different groups to try and get something done. You want to manage one group. And that's what we try and deliver. Okay, U.S. agents and electronic submissions. Can your U.S. agent prepare electronic submissions? This is a question you should be asking yourself. And how are you going to get that done? All right. Does your U.S. agent have electronic signature capabilities? You have to have electronic signature capabilities to do this stuff. So these are questions when you're trying to figure out who's going to be your agent, you need to ask these questions. And does your U.S. agent have secure email with FDA? That's a given. And that is the end of my presentation. That's the last slide. All right, well, I appreciate the time to be able to present to you, and I'm going to change presenters. I'm going to give you over to Lydia.
Okay, I think we're here. Yes, now we can hear you, Lydia.
These moments of the presenter change. Thank you very much, Bruce. I hope that everybody can hear me well now. And I will present the session on DMFs, and I will explain how DMF works in US. First of all, we will see in this presentation what is DMF, for what purpose we use it, what are the different types of DMFs, its structure and contents, and when DMF is assessed, the inspections, the logistics around DMFs, and the different status I can have for DMFs. It's active, available for reference, and we will see finally the main differences between European ASMFs and the US DMF system. Well, first of all, DMF is a submission to the FDA defined in 21 CFR chapter 420, and the DMF is used basically to provide confidential, detailed information about a facility, a process, articles, or something used in the manufacturing of one or more human drugs. What is it that I use this system, I use this submission to provide this confidential information to the FDA and to nobody else. So I don't need to share my confidential information about my process, my facility, my active substance, or my intermediate to other third parties. An important information is that, well, DMF is not, the submission of a DMF is not mandatory at all. So the submission of a DMF is not required by law or by any FDA regulation, and it is absolutely the choice of the holder, of the manufacturer, to submit a DMF or not. Well, a little bit of information about nomenclature. As Bruce has explained in the previous presentation, we have several centers, several divisions of the FDA. For instance, if we speak about CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Drug Research, this center, this CDER, will assess the DMFs of drug master files. And on the other hand, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER, will take care of evaluation of the master files or biological product files, BPFs. We will not speak in this presentation about other types of master files not related to CDER or CBER, so we will not speak about medical device files or food master files, and we will speak about DMFs, master files, or biological product files. And in this presentation, we will, irrespective of their nature, use the term drug master file, DMF, for simplification. Okay. Well, a DMF can be used to support during the life cycle of an application at different levels. For instance, I can use a DMF to support an IND. I can use a DMF to support an NDA or a BLA, and also to support a supplement. And even I can use a DMF to support another DMF. So I can use a DMF in different moments of the life cycle of my development and to support different submissions. Regarding the type of DMFs, we have currently 4 types of DMFs. Type 2, which is, you will see, the more often used by holders, by companies, which refers to a drug substance intermediate, or any material used in the preparation of a drug substance, a reagent, whatever, or even a drug product. So this is the scope of a type 2 DMF. Another type which is very often used is the type 3, which is the packaging material DMF. This is a type 3. DMF can be, for instance, for bottles, cups, ampoules, whatever. So it is very frequent that in a BLA or NDA application, we find a set of type 3 DMFs to compose the sections on packaging materials. Another type of DMF which is also used is the type 4, referring to excipients, colorants, flavors, essences, or any non-active ingredient material used in the preparation of a drug, a human drug. This is not used or not necessary at all for excipients or materials described in a pharmacopoeia, but can be useful for those. Regarding the structure, content and format of the DMF, well, we will have administrative information, the quality overall summary, and the sections applicable according to the eCTD structure of Module 3. Okay, then, for the administrative information, we will follow the Module 1 according to the FDA guidance, which has been published first in 1989, has been updated, and now we have recent information updated in the FDA website. And for the non-administrative section, for the technical sections, we will follow the structure of eCTD. Several important information is that from as of May next year, any new DMF or biological product file should be submitted according to the eCTD format. So paper will be no longer accepted after May 2018. This requirement has been postponed because the deadline was first May this year, but finally the FDA extended the deadline. So what happens to all DMFs submitted to the FDA? You will see that there is a huge amount of DMF submitted, but there is no need actually to resubmit existing DMFs in paper, so we don't need to resubmit in eCTD format what is already submitted, but all amendments to existing DMFs will follow eCTD format. Okay, And in the case we choose to resubmit our DMF, if there is any change introduced, we should indicate it clearly. Okay, then. What about the assessment of a DMF? A DMF is not reviewed by itself. So the review of a DMF is triggered in relation to the assessment of another application which is supporting too. So first, the DMF holder will submit a DMF before the applicant will submit their IND, NDA, abbreviated NDA or BLA. Another thing that is very important is that, well, and we hear often that somebody says that we have a DMF approved by the FDA. This is not correct. So a DMF is not approved or disapproved. Well, what is done is that FDA is reviewing the DMF together with another submission. But DMF is not approved or disapproved. The DMF, it can be active or inactive. We will see it later. Well, and what about inspection? Normally, we don't have to expect any inspection when we support an IND, and this inspection is most likely for when DMF is supporting an NDA. Although considering the minimization of inspection outside US activities, well, we should expect that less inspection will be carried out. If we look quickly to the logistics of DMFs, first of all, well, we said, first, the DMF holder submits the DMF to the FDA. What happens later? First thing is that FDA and precisely the Office of Business Support, Business Process Support, conducts what is called an administrative filing review. It's a kind of validation of the to make sure that the DMF is complete, and this is for all types of DMFs. This process can take 2-3 weeks. But our recommendation is to allow at least 30 days from the DMF submission up to the point when the NDA or IND holder targets to submit. So after this administrative review, two things can happen. If there are things to complete, the DMF can be pending, or if it is considered complete, the DMF is active, and the FDA will send a letter with a DMF number and an acknowledgement. If the DMF is pending, I have to have the deficiency solved before have this DMF active and the acknowledgement. Only after we have this DMF number and acknowledgement, the IND, NDA, or BLA holder can proceed to the submission, because as DMF holder, I need to communicate the DMF number and to provide the IND or NDA holder with a letter of authorization. So this is the logistics for all DMFs. However, if we see the special case of Type 2 DMFs supporting a generic application under GDUFA, there is one more step. So after I have this administrative filing review and I have my DMF active, I have another check, which is the DMF initial completeness assessment under GDUFA, for which the FDA has published specific guidance, and basically some other aspects will be checked, which are more technical. There is a checklist, and only after this DMF initial completeness assessment, I will have this DMF available for review. So for type 2 DMFs supporting generic applications, I have to go through the first administrative review and the second completeness assessment under GDUFA. Okay, and only after this DMF is available for review, the generic company will be allowed to refer to my DMF. Okay. What are the DMF holder obligations? So when I have my DMF active and available for review, if it is type 2 under GDUFA, well, I have obligations to submit all changes amendments, to notify any change to FDA in the holder address or name, or if I have an US agent or representative, and to submit annual update, which is very important. Notify authorized parties of changes and submit the letter of authorizations for the companies making references to my DMF. What happens if I do not submit my annual update in 3 years? Well, that I can lose my status of active DMF. So the first thing, FDA will issue a letter, an overdue notice letter, and if I do not respond in 90 days, my FDA DMF status will be changed and will be unavailable for review or inactive. Okay. Reactivation is always possible by submission of an annual report. Well, then how can I check if a DMF is active or available for reference? Well, in the FDA website, we have a list of active or inactive DMFs. The most recent is dated until the end of June, and it contains a lot of entries, over 30,000 entries. And if we see, there is about 47% of the total are active DMFs, and of them, 70 of the total active DMFs are type 2. How can I see if the DMF under GDUFA, if a DMF under GDUFA is available for review? Well, there is another list of DMFs available for review, and currently, until 15 September, we have there over 4,100 DMFs, which are currently have undergone the completeness assessment and are available for review. So 41% of total active type 2 DMFs have completed this completeness assessment. And finally, to finalize my presentation, what are the main differences between the US and European system? Well, obviously, as you see, in US, we can have DMFs almost for everything, for drugs, biologicals, medical device. In Europe, we can have the ASMFs for only drugs, and biological products are not in the system of DMF. So I cannot use the DMF system for biological products in Europe. Regarding the type of substance of material, well, we can have active substance, excipients, intermediates, packaging, drug products, and in Europe, I can refer in a DMF only active substances. The number of DMFs included in an application for supporting an NDA, I can have a lot of DMFs, including the API, intermediates to the API, regions, packaging materials, or other. in Europe, I can have only alternative suppliers of the API. The structure is also very important. There is no restricted and open part, or no restricted and applicants part in the US DMF. And we include, so we do not include the DMF in the NDA application. There is an important difference in the European system, because we use the applicant's part and the restricted part. The applicant's part is integrated in the dossier submission. In the US, it is not. It is a completely different submission sent directly and only to the FDA. And that's all for the DMFs. Thank you. And now, if Michael, can you kindly continue with the next session? Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to continue. Thank you very much, Lydia. That was a very visual, very nice presentation. This is very helpful with so many different data and so many categories. It's easy to be confused. I will now continue, and our IT colleagues, they will just switch over so that my screen will be seen just in a second. Here we go. And let's have a look at the agenda. You've noticed that we are running a little bit late. We have covered the FDA introduction, what's hot, and now the part about drug development, where the drug master file was also included. Now we'll look at the big submissions, the new drug application, biologics license application, and also the abbreviated version of an NDA, and real quickly we'll have a look at eCTD. So the first thing off are the big presentations, the big submissions, the new drug application. Here we go. So in such a short webinar, for me, if you've never worked in FDA Regulatory Affairs, the main objective would be that you remember afterwards, and also in a week or two, you will still remember this graph, this picture, just with the basic pathways that exist in the FDA. And this is on the one hand side, the classical drugs, the new drug application, the full application as we have it in Europe, the marketing authorization application. There it's called the Article 505(b)(1). You just have to memorize this, 505(b)(1). And this is the full application. This can afterwards be changed with supplements, similar to the variations in Europe. But these can be quite substantial. You can really change with a clinical supplement, for example, the registration. There's a second pathway that's very important, the 505(b)(2). This can be compared, it could be called something like a modified hybrid drug pathway, but people just call it the 505(b)(2). We'll look at that very briefly. And then there's the very well-known, the generic pathway. This is the ANDA, the 505(j) pathway. Now for the biological products, we have the Public Health Services Act, the PHS, and there's the Section 351 that applies to biologic products. And this one here is the BLA, the Biologic License pathway, Biologic License Application pathway, which afterwards, once you have obtained the license, can also be modified. So you have the supplements, just like an NDA with the supplements here, you have the same pattern. And we have the biosimilar pathway, which is quite new. This is the 351K, which is here equivalent to the generic pathway. So this is really, I think, one of the most important graphics here of this part of the webinar. And it helped me quite a lot to keep in mind how the pathways in the US work. Now, let's have a look at NDA. This is the formal process to obtain approval for sale and marketing in the US since 1938. Every new drug has passed through this before it could be sold. And just like our MAAs in Europe, this is what needs to, what is used to tell the drug's whole story. So you really have to include here what happened during the clinical tests, what are the results of the animal studies, the ingredients, all the kinetics, the dynamics, pharmacodynamics, how the drug behaves in the body, manufacturing, processing, packaging, everything needs to be included just like in a full dossier in Europe. We have three types of NDAs, and I put again up here this little picture, and actually my webinar panel is a little bit in the way, so I'll just make this smaller. And the three types are Section 505(b)(1) that I mentioned, the classic full original NDA, 505(b)(2) NDA, the modified hybrid NDA, and the 505(j), the ANDA, the abbreviated NDA for generic products. These are the three types of NDAs that exist. Now, an example for an NDA for a full application, this is Merck's simvastatin from 1991. This is a classic originator drug. And you can see it's classified here, the chemical type, it's a new molecular entity, and it was a standard review. So this is a full NDA application here. Now, later in 2006, we have the generic from it. This was Teva, simvastatin, the 505(j), the ANDA. And you can see it's also the FDA application number, ANDA. And later we'll see a 505(b)(2). Now, for NDA application dossiers, you obviously will have to consult a lot of guidance documents, these typical guidance for industry documents. This is very easy to access those on the FDA website. It's really easy to navigate to the NDA page. It's called like this. I include the link here as well. And then you will simply see the whole list, and it doesn't stop here. It goes on for a very long time, of guidance documents that help you prepare an NDA. And obviously here in this short webinar, we're not going to look at those, but this is what you will have to look into to really see the specific requirements and the best practice expected by FDA for everything that is covered. Sorry, the phone is ringing. For your new drug application, Now, about the format and content, since May 2017, now we have to submit everything for NDAs in electronic format, in eCTD format. And we have a little bit more of details in the last session today. About the structure and content, we have this CTD format now. Bruce already mentioned before that there was a different traditional format before, and we have this mapping to the CFR, to the Code of Federal Regulations sections. And this document that he named before, it's the CTOC, this comprehensive table of contents, headings, and hierarchy. And I'll just open it very briefly. This is something that you will really need to work with when you prepare for an NDA. It contains the entire CTD structure with the module 1, everything of module 3, 4, 5, and then the interesting part, what Bruce mentioned, the mapping section here for the IND that he mentioned, and further down we have the NDA and the BLA mapping. And just a few examples, here you can see the CTD module sections, and then if you go back over from any of those, you can see which is the corresponding Code of Federal Regulation source. So if you really want to look at, for example, here, this part, the annual report transmittal, this would be this form, the 2252, then the Code of Federal Regulation would be this one, and you can look this up. Or further down, let's see, the request for pediatric exclusivity determination, 193, you will have to look into the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children's Act, and there is the reference for this. And this just keeps going, and this will be an important document for you when you really start to work on an NDA. The module 1 is completely different than what we have in Europe. I think everyone knows this. There is a specific guidance for industry document for this. This will explain the form 356H. This is what in Europe is the application form. This will also explain all the administrative documents that need to be included that are completely different than in Europe, how prescribing information is presented, and also the annotated text. And this is something that is also not existing in Europe. It's quite nice, I think. These annotations in the labeling text, they shall direct the reviewer directly to the statements in the summaries, or the information in the summaries and the other models that support each statement in the labeling. And I think that's Of course, it's quite some work, but this is quite nice and convenient for the reviewer. And it doesn't stop there. You have many more regional specifics that you have to comply with. All right, the NDA review process, I'm going to skip this here. There's an excellent document prepared by FDA themselves. It's the 21st Century Review Process Desk Reference Guide, and it's well written, very visual. You have, for example, this graphic here, and this explains, this is just the overview, but in this document you will see exactly what happens. Just in the very basic steps is that before you submit your NDA, you will have certain pre-submission activities. You will discuss critical points of the submission. You will discuss whether the presentation, whether the dossier eases cross-reference, if the data is presented in a manner that facilitates review, something that is very much appreciated by FDA. And at this point, you will also have to inform FDA about your timing of submission. At day one, obviously, you submit your dossier, and the next step is the process submission. This means that the document control room staff, they will process the file technically, and also they will distribute the document, the dossier, to the respective appropriate review divisions. And your regulatory project manager, the RPM, will also conduct an initial review at this point just to check that certain regulatory requirements are met and that the user fee has paid these things. Afterwards, we have an important step, step 3, the plan review, where the review team will conduct an initial quick analysis of your dossier and will make an opinion and a recommendation of the fileability of your dossier. And if everyone agrees in those filing meetings that it shall go forward, they will proceed with planning meetings, and then they will plan the actual review, and then you will be notified that the whole process continues. Now, the review part is vastly different than in Europe. Here we have a very interactive review culture at FDA, and your team also needs to be very well prepared. It needs to be very active, and you need to be able to respond very quickly to the questions of FDA. So this should not be something where it takes you days and days to answer to the request of FDA for specific topics. You have to be very agile here. At this point here, at this time, you will also have to submit safety update reports, and this is when you will be inspected. CGMP inspections, GCP inspections, and the GLP inspections will take place during the assessment. And finally, if it applies for your product, you will have advisory committee meeting, and then there will be the official action. Now, just so far for the NDA, and really quickly, we will have a look at the 505(b)(2), and this is what I called here a modified hybrid drug, but really the name is 505(b)(2). And what is this? I won't go into too much detail here, but just so that you understand what this means. It's an application for which one or more of the investigations relied upon by the applicant for approval, and this is the official wording by FDA, were not conducted by or for the applicant, and for which the applicant has not obtained the right of reference or use of the data for whom the investigations were conducted. And this leads to two options. You can either have a 505(b)(2), which is based on published literature. So your application to any extent, to really any extent, will depend on published literature, or to any extent you're missing the right of reference to any raw data that is needed for you to prove that your application is valid or acceptable. And the second option is, did you rely on two agency findings of safety or effectiveness? So if there is an approved drug and there is agency information available and you refer to this, obviously this is beneficial in a global manner because this reduces the overall amount of clinical or preclinical studies needed. Then this also falls into the 505(b)(2) application category. And here's an example. Abbott in 2008, they used their own drug of niacin, and they combined the data, the generic data that is available for simvastatin, and they created a new combination of these two active ingredients, and using their own drug plus the making reference to the generic drug data, they only needed one clinical study comparing to simvastatin alone, and that was sufficient, and they had a new drug application approval via this 505(b)(2) pathway, and with only one clinical study. Now, why is all this important? Because, I mean, this is just one example, but this can be used for dosage form. You can change to, for example, from a solid oral dosage form to transdermal patch, strength, route of administration. You can substitute an active ingredient in existing product. There are many things that can be done with a 505(b)(2). The main importance here is usually that this pathway can conflict with existing patents, and so if you file via 505(b)(2), FDA will have a specific look on any patent conflicts. All right, so this was NDA 55(b)(1), 55(b)(2). We'll have a few slides on the BLA, the Biologics License Application. This is a huge topic, specifically the part about biosimilars. There are conferences of various days that just cover this topic, and in this little webinar we'll just speak briefly about this pathway. So it's the Public Health Service Act 351 that is the legal framework for this. And there are many similarities, actually many things are similar between NDA and BLA, but there are also quite a few differences. Obviously the products are different, and as Bruce mentioned, there are two elements of FDA that can be involved in the review. And as I just mentioned, we have this Public Health Service Act 351 that implies further consequences, and here are the more details. So we have, depending on your specific product, only if it's really a certain kind of biological product, it will be the Center for Biological Evaluation and Research, and not the CDAR, that will be in charge of the review. So you will have a different center to deal with. Your product will fall under the Federal Food and Drug Act, but it will also fall under the Public Health Service Act, the PHS Act, and this one has some additional elements, and this includes the importance of appropriate manufacturing controls, and also it gives the authority to FDA that in case of any possible danger to public, they can immediately suspend your product. So you see, there's a lot of overlap. Without going into detail, I think the take-home message is that there are some additional regulations that have to be considered, and some additional elements that are critical, and that additional authority for FDA if you have a BLA product. In terms of biosimilars, this is something very exciting. This is the last pathway just down here, the 351K, which is quite new. This is just with the 2010 Biosimilar Price Competition and Innovation Act. This is now the abbreviated licensure pathway for biosimilars, and the definition of FDA is it's highly similar to the reference product, okay, and there is no clinically meaningful difference. We won't go into any science here, but what's interesting is that the regulatory and commercial framework is still developing in the US, and in Europe there are actually many more valid licenses, marketing authorizations. We have now 40 granted in Europe, 35 are valid, and only 7 authorizations in the US. There's still little experience with the requirements that FDA has with interchangeability, because you need specific switching studies for these, and this ultimately depends on state regulation, so not nationwide regulation, but it's actually the specific state in the US which will implement the requirements for interchangeability. So there's still quite a long path to go for the companies and also for the authorities. There's no clear guidance on extrapolation yet, and it seems that if there is no objection, I'm not a legal expert, but the ruling for random suffixes for biosimilars in their name clearly is a favor for the originators, because now this biosimilars will always have these 4 letters, this random suffix, which just is not very attractive. So people are really afraid that this really is a disadvantage for the biosimilar companies. And just as a last news here, we have latest news just 1 week ago, Amgen received approval of MASI, the bevacizumab biosimilar, which was a Genentech's Avastin, and this is now the first biosimilar treatment of cancer. There are 5 indications. This was quite a big news that came out last week. Okay, and I'm sorry about going very quickly, but you know we're running a little bit late in time. And now I will pass over again the microphone and the presentation to Lydia, because she will present the ANDA pathway, the generic pathway.
Please apologize for these inconveniences. I will present the generics and as quickly as possible, because we are running out of time and behind the schedule. So first thing, I will focus on the differences between the generic procedures and the generic applications between US and Europe. So, basically, what is a generic product is the same definition, a product which is comparable to an innovator product in dosage form, strength, route of administration, quality, performance, intended use. And the application is abbreviated because the same as in Europe, it is not required to include preclinical and clinical data, but I need to demonstrate that the product is bioequivalent. This is the general concept, and we will go through very important, essential concepts in a very quick manner. First thing, the regulation is the chapter 31492 of the Code of Federal Regulations. We can find there the complete reference to regulation. We can refer also to the Manual of Policies and Procedures published by FDA about generics, to the FDA General Guidance, and also to the specific bioequivalence guidance. We will see the specific bioequivalence guidance in more detail. Well, as Michael has explained, Module 1 has nothing to do with the US, with the European Module 1. We have a specific form which is equivalent to our application form in Europe, also for generics. There is a key document which is the INDA checklist for completeness and acceptability. Do not confuse the term with the completeness assessment for DMF. This is a kind of ANDA checklist. If you just put in the Google ANDA checklist FDA, and there is a kind of form, and where you can check if your application is complete, and you can see if all aspects that are required in a generic application are completed. Okay, then the applications are submitted to the CDER Office of Generic Drugs, and there are fees applicable since 2012 according to GDUFA concepts. So important, before 2012 there was no fee applicable for generic drugs, and it was just applied since the entry onto force of GDUFA in 2012. Another concept, importantly, eCTD is mandatory as of May 2017. Another concept which is important is controlled correspondence. Controlled correspondence is a form of communication to FDA to ask to inquire for precise information, not for general drug development concepts, which are normally not the scope of controlled correspondence. So controlled correspondence is in such a way a standard form of communication via email with the FDA to ask precise, specific questions around our development, but precise questions and not general questions on drug development that can be dealt in pre-ANDA meetings. Okay. Another important key concept is the Orange Book. We will see it is a compendia, electronic compendia of FDA-approved products, and with the concept of therapeutic evaluations. Important concept also, reference listed drug. What is reference listed drug? Is the drug against which I have to be compared. So the in other words, the bioequivalence study of my generic drug for US should be conducted against the reference listed drug, which has been already identified by the FDA. Another point, the Freedom of Information Act. If we don't find the information we are seeking for in the Orange Book or other sources of information, we can always ask directly to the FDA referring to the Freedom of Information Act. Another concept, the suitability petition, is a procedure for which if my generic drug, or if my drug, does not fit exactly with the generic definition, so I have a different indication, a different strength, dosage form, or whatever is different and does not fulfill the generic concept, I have the option to submit a suitability petition and to ask the FDA if my drug is suitable to be submitted under a generic application. Well, the other option I have, as Michael has mentioned, is to go directly to submit a 505(b)(2) application, which I can do immediately, and for a suitability petition I have to wait for the FDA response, which can take very long. And another concept which we have to take into account is the patent certification. We will explain it in detail because in Europe, authorities, regulators don't care that much about patent status and leave all the responsibility to companies. However, before the submission of a generic application, I have to make sure what is the patent status, and you will see that it will have a very important impact in the procedure and in the outcome. Okay, so these are the essential concepts very quickly because we have no more time. And we go quickly to see how does the Orange Book and the reference listed drug concepts and how to use this electronic Orange Book. So this is a very powerful tool to obtain information about approved drugs. Importantly, there are not only generic products, but all type of products, all approved products are included in the Orange Book. But in the scope of this presentation, we will share with you how we can use the electronic Orange Book to search reference listed drug and product status. Well, first thing, if we search in the Orange Book, we access to the Orange Book and we put, for instance, pantoprazole, and we search. What happens? We obtain a full list of all pantoprazole products existing, authorized in the with the active ingredient, applicant, holder, and we see that there are several indications of RLD. So in the list I have identified which one of all them is the reference listed drug. So in Europe I have to work to identify myself which is the originator against which I have to do to carry out the bioequivalence study. In US I have the drug product, the originator, the reference listed drug identified. I can have also identified reference standards which are used for the scope of analytical standards, but the reference listed drug, RLD, is the one to be used in as reference in the bioequivalence study. there is a recent published guidance for referencing the approved products in generic submissions that basically explains how to use this Orange Book. This is very interesting reading. Another information, if we expand the application number field, we will obtain a number of data about the product details, and in this field we have also information regarding the patent and exclusivity information, patent and data exclusivity. If we go to this field, we see that we have here patent data and exclusivity data summarized for each NDA for each product included in the Orange Book. So we can use this information. For which purpose, you will see, because we have to set up our application, the type of patent. Well, more information. Well, there is a lag time after a generic product is approved and the product appears in the Orange Book. For this, we have monthly lists of what is called first-time generic approval or first generics, which appear in lists before are added formally to the Orange Book. Well, regarding patent certification, what is it and how is it managed? Well, I can have in my application, in my 356H form, the equivalent to the application form in Europe, I have to tick one of these four patent certification, this paragraph 1, 2, 3, or 4. The paragraph 1 is when no patent information exists for the related brand product. Paragraph 2 is when the patent has expired. Paragraph 3 is when there is a patent in place, not yet expired, and I acknowledge that this patent exists, and I note it in my application. And then the most challenging one is the paragraph 4, in which I admit that the patent has not yet expired, and it is noted in my application, but I believe that the patent is not valid and that I'm not infringing the patent. So I challenge the patent of the originator. In the first case, FDA may approve the generic application immediately, and several generics can go to the market at the same time. The FDA, if I use paragraph 2, the FDA may approve the generic immediately, and the same, several generics can go to the market at the same time. What happens if there is a paragraph 3? Well, the FDA can assess my application, but since I have selected the paragraph 3, I can obtain a tentative approval, and the effective approval will take place when the patent expires. So I wait until the day the patent expires. I have my tentative approval, I have approved my product, but I wait until the patent expires. And in this scenario, several, one or more generic may enter on the date the patent expires. But what happens if I use a paragraph 4? So there is a challenge process, evidently. And what is the advantage of the using this process? Because I have high likelihood, there is very likely that the originator company will sue me. So this, I will enter in a court process. Well, the benefit for this is that I can benefit eventually of 180 days of exclusivity if I'm the first to file and I win the court, or if the court decides in favor of the generic application. This is more or less, I can see the information in the FDA website of the drugs at FDA. Is another database, is not the same compendia as the Orange Book, and contains the information of FDA approved drug products and also the history of the assessment, so the equivalent of the assessment reports that the European authorities publish after the assessment. So if I search in this database, I will find this tentative approval by month, and I can see which are the tentative approvals, so those generic which are approved but still waiting until the patent expires to be marketed. Okay. Another concept is the paragraph 4 certification. More or less, when I challenge the patent of the originator, well, there is a first 45 days. It is a complex procedure, so it all depends. In 45 days, the originator can sue and bring me to the court to the generic application, or not. If the originator not sue, I can proceed. But if a court procedure starts, there is a third. It can be in 45 days. There is a 30-month stay period, and on that time, I can, if the court decision is first is favoring the generic product, I can have this 180-day exclusivity, and any other generic coming after me cannot be in the market until these 180 days has expired. Another option is after these 30 months have expired, I have also several options, and always if the court rules in the generic applicant's favor, I can benefit of these 180 days of exclusivity. So we can also see the history of patent, paragraph 4 patent certifications published at FDA. There is a cumulative list published in the FDA regarding these patent certifications, and this is a model of this letter of where the FDA communicates that the exclusivity for the generic company of 180 days has been granted. Okay. Another specific concept are the product-specific guidance for generic drug development. This development of a specific guidance allows to reduce the number of pre-ANDA meetings that are normally not expected by the FDA, and because they prefer to develop guidance for each new product and to include this guidance in the website. So if we go to this FDA page, we can search the different individual specific bioequivalence guidance. For instance, if we see this recent one, a prepitant, what kind of information we find? Well, very easy, the kind of a study to be conducted, one fasting, one fed, even the criteria of bioequivalence, the number of subjects, the dissolution, and sampling times, and even the dissolution conditions. So there is a lot of information about how to design bioequivalence study published by the FDA. Okay. Now another totally different chapter. How is the assessment procedure and how this procedure has evolved after the come into force of GDUFA. First, several years ago, the validation or the fileability time was an estimate of 60 days, and the assessment procedure for a generic product was very, very long. It was about 4 years of time, the statistics to approval after the start of GDUFA. Or even 5 years, so as long as 5 years. After the entry into force of GDUFA, this time was reduced gradually. And what are the main differences? So before the start of GDUFA, the disciplines were reviewed one by one, and we had partial letters or partial action letters. After the coming to force of GDUFA, the Office of Generic Drugs started to conduct parallel discipline review and fixed a number of goals to reduce the review time. So in the first year, second year, and third year, assessment time was reduced dramatically, and the goal for this year, which is the 5th of GDUFA, is the 90% of original generic application is assessed in only 10 months. Well, and how was it? According to the latest information published by the Office of Generic Drug in the annual report of 2016, Dr. Kathleen Wool, who is the director of the division, mentioned that absolutely they met the required GDUFA review timeframes, so we can conclude that, well, the review time has effectively been reduced according to GDUFA goals. And just the last information, and as Bruce explained, please have a look on the last information on the drug user fee under GDUFA for fiscal year 2018. You will see that there is a lot of difference. There is a totally different concept, which is the program fee, which was not present before. In this program fee, companies are divided in large, medium, and small according to the number of generic products that they that the company has registered, and this is in addition to the fees for the submission of DMFs, the establishment of facilities, and the submission of NDA generic application. Well, thanks a lot. And Michael, I think it's you who continue the talk about eCTD.
Yes, thank you very much, Lydia. Thanks a lot. Then we just need our IT colleagues to convert me back to presenter. Wonderful, thank you. Now the last 5 minutes will be on eCTD, on FDA electronic submissions. This is something where we've had several important deadlines. I think most of us who work with FDA know that since May 5th, 2017, now we have to submit NDA, BLA, ANDA in eCTD format. DMF was also included there, but it was postponed 1 year, so along with commercial INDs, now as of May 5th, 2018, we'll have to submit those in eCTD format. eCTD specifications, this is something quite basic. Luckily, we have software that takes care of it. 2 to 5, this is just the common 3.22 version for eCTD backbone. For the eCTD Module 1 specification, this is of the United States, we have the version 2.3. There's the link for this. this is also something that usually your software has this included. Now, what's important to know also in this regard of electronic submissions is structured product labeling, SPL. This is an XML file. Some of you might know this. It's not only labeling, this is used for the exchange of product information, but also facility information. So more than just the text of products are submitted via SPL format. Also in the annual report submissions, we have to include also the content of labeling in SPL format. You need specific software for this. It's not something that you can simply produce by yourself. What has just been released, I think a few days ago, it's on our website in the news section, the REMS, this is the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategies. This is comparable to our European risk management plans. Now they have a draft guidance. This in the future will also be submitted electronically in SPL format. Once the guidance is finalized, it will be 2 years, and then this is mandatory. So SPL is also something that for the electronic people out there needs to be under control. One thing that in the moment of thinking about compiling an eCTD is very important is the general review strategy of the US and FDA. In Europe, most assessors really start from the summaries, the overview documents, and they will then, if they have doubts, work their way to the raw data. FDA, by their own procedures, they work completely in the opposite direction. They start from the raw data, they undertake their own analysis, they have their own softwares for all the data processing, and then they work their way up. They come to their own conclusions and then compare them to our conclusions and our overviews and summaries. Now, this implies that they have a much more focus on the raw data in module 4 and 5. And this is why if we compare now the module 5 differences between Europe and US, we have, of course, the study tagging file for those of you who know those. There's different node extensions, study files, the clinical report forms, case report forms, sorry. But the main problem here are those data sets. And this is a huge amount of work and also a huge amount of data. And there are also some important deadlines. For studies that start after December 2017 of last year, now we have to submit for NDAs, BLAs, and ANDAs the data in these standardized formats. And this is not something that you can do by yourself. This is something that your clinical CRO needs to handle, your non-clinical CROs. They need to facilitate this. You need to understand what is really required. You need to include this into the software. And this is why the eCTD submissions to FDA in size are tremendously much bigger than anything we would ever submit in Europe. In gigabytes, there's no comparison. FDA submissions can be much, much bigger simply because of these original raw data from the clinical and non-clinical studies. For IND submissions, we have also a deadline as of December this year. Afterwards, the same applies for INDs. Now, this is just 5 slides here, but there are some most important points that we always conclude with in our eCTD presentations. You know, at Asphalion, we have a very big team for electronic submissions. Our team undertakes a lot of FDA submissions. And my colleague Remco Munich, he would love to make a presentation of hours and hours here, but we said that maybe for a webinar, this is just too much. We wanted to share, nevertheless, here some important points. As you've seen, eCTD is mandatory for the majority of pathways now. What I didn't explain here, but this is really important, PDF quality is vital. You need to have much better PDF quality than what is required in Europe, and this can be really a problem if you start from a European dossier. You have to really double check this. And in our projects where we convert European dossiers to FDA dossiers, this is where a lot of time is spent and also where we can have a lot of delays. And this goes hand in hand with requirements for bookmark and hyperlinks, which are much higher. And as I mentioned, these data sets, which are now mandatory. You also need to be under control of the electronic submission gateway. We have this installed at home in our offices. So many things to take into consideration. Strategy for compliance, you really have to be careful with your timeline and resource estimations, because if you have a team that knows how to submit in Europe, it's not the same for FDA. There's really quite a significant difference. If you come from Europe and you have a European dossier and you want to convert this into a US dossier, Major points will be module 1, obviously, but then also the data sets, the case report forms, study tagging files, and the work around the conversion of node extensions. And you will have to spend quite a lot of time with additional hyperlinking, and as I mentioned, the improvement of document format. And so estimating the time for this is not straightforward. And this goes directly along with this. You need to, if you work in projects towards registration, towards new drug application, or like you need to focus early on a factor that might affect PDF quality. So training for internal, external writers is important. And also double check with your CROs that non-clinical, clinical data set requirements will be met. All right, that was just 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Last year again, please keep in mind, we will have more events, physical events, where we have more time, and also where it's easier to present more in depth these details about FDA. We will have our event in January 2018 in Munich, and then the full seminar, open seminar next summer. The webinar now has come to an end, but we have received quite a lot of questions, and we will just use a little bit of time to answer some of those, because we have run into quite some significant delay. And I will open the microphone for Bruce and Lydia so we can attack the questions.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I have some of the questions, and I'll just go through the ones that that I can work within the time constraints. The first question was, what about different filling size? And this question, I believe, pertains to program fees for PDUFA. This is the new drug, new biologic program fees. And we said that the program fees were based on the number of products, and a product was defined as a finished dosage form, each strength. All right, and so it doesn't go into filling size. So you could have a strength, say 2 milligram, and have 50 tablets, 100 tablets, 300 tablets, 5,000 tablets. It doesn't matter about the fill size in terms of tablets. The only thing where I can think about fill size is when you're talking about some of the injectables where potency might be based on the fill in the container. So if you have different potencies, that is the same as a different strength, and your fee will be based on either the strength or potency differences. The second question is, are pre-IND meetings mandatory or optional? And the answer is that they are optional. I have had experience where the agency will come back and say, we expect you to have a meeting. And that's if you just go ahead and file the IND. That's certainly not every FDA division will do that. This happened to be a gene therapy and also a cell therapy product, and they really wanted to meet with us before we filed the IND, so they came back, they were a little upset. The third question says, if a company manufactures an API intermediate that is not marketed within the US, but it is used by another company to produce final API, the intermediate company does not need to register with FDA annually. Can you please confirm? And I confirm that if it's an API intermediate, you would not have to register that establishment. The fourth one I found is, it was just a statement that said in module 1.20 of IND, which is the general investigational plan, FDA also is requesting the study data standardization plan. And this gets back to what you were saying, Michael, about the large databases of raw data that go into the submission. FDA is now asking for details of your data standardization plan in that 1.20 general investigational plan. And with that, I'm going to cut it off, and I'll pass it back to you, Michael, for the wrap up. Okay,
excellent. There's, I have to apologize for the significant delay that we have accumulated. We have more questions. Some of those are very specific. Apologize if we cannot answer all of these right now. Please contact us and with your specific doubts and questions, we will be happy to get in touch with you and discuss those. We've come to an end. I would like to thank Bruce very much for teaming up with us once again, and for this collaboration between Reguliance and Asphalion, which is always a pleasure. A big thank you to all of you for assisting this webinar. We've had a lot of attendees, and we look forward to being in touch with you very soon. And we hope very much that you enjoyed this webinar and that it was useful for you, and that it was that it is a resource for you in your learning curve for regulatory affairs for FDA, or your maybe already existing FDA projects. Everyone, have a very nice evening. Once again, thank you very much, and take care. Bye-bye.